One of the countries that's improved its agricultural policy the most has been Bangladesh. During the early 1970s, the situation in Bangladesh was quite grim. Many people starved to death, a lot of the population was extremely vulnerable, and the country was heavily dependent on food aid from outside. At the same time, Bangladesh had some of the worst agricultural policies in the world. They had price controls, they restricted imports, and the government controlled a good deal of both fertilizer and irrigation. The Bangladesh Agricultural Development Corporation was responsible for importing and wholesaling virtually all of the agricultural inputs. In general, market price signals were not allowed to operate, there wasn't much scope for entrepreneurship, and most important agricultural decisions were politicized. Starting in the 1980s, there were a series of reforms stretching over about 15 years which moved Bangladesh from having some of the worst agricultural policies in the world to having some of the best. Perhaps most importantly, it became quite easy to import foodstuffs from abroad. So if there were people who needed food, it was then possible to get that food through trade. Markets within the country were liberalized, price controls were removed, and government gave up most of its control over the fertilizer market and also to well irrigation. Over the course of about 10 years, the use of fertilizer tripled once the government essentially privatized fertilizer markets. The government continued its role in research and development for agriculture, flood control, and also infrastructure, but overall Bangladesh moved to having the freest and least subsidized agricultural markets in all of South Asia. The reforms have been quite a success. The production of food in Bangladesh went up, the production of rice went up, and there was rapid downward pressure on the price of rice due to competition and market incentives. The country is now essentially self-sufficient in rice, and in fact has become a significant agricultural exporter. Earlier, in the 1990s, it was necessary on some occasions to import food from abroad, and this proved possible, and it happened through markets, often trading with India. These imports staved off what might have been potential famines. The reforms also improved the fiscal position of the Bangladeshi government, and now when food aid is given, that aid is actually more likely to be targeted to the very poor. Finally, following the reforms, Bangladesh made impressive progress on the United Nations Human Development Index, in part because it was feeding its people much better. To read more on this very interesting and successful episode, I recommend these sources.